Hello everyone, and welcome to video number 14 in the Safe Passage series. I'd like to start today by sharing with you a little memento that I keep in my mini museum that doubles as a studio and an office. It's a Christmas card that I received in 1980 from a couple in Flesherton, Ontario named Howard and Ethel McGee. And on one side of the card there is an original painting by Howard McGee, who, as many of you might know, was a very accomplished artist, especially of landscapes. I suspect that many homes in the area have examples of his work proudly displayed. So the message contains some lines of poetry. Along the line of smoky hills, the crimson forest stands, while all day long the blue jay calls throughout the autumn lands. And I remember that stanza from a poem from memorizing it in public school, our little SS number 10 Artemisia one-room school in Ceylon, Ontario. And I think that probably many of you, especially from my generation, will remember memorizing poetry, because at that time it was considered an essential part of the language arts program. And I think it really should still be, because when you learn something by heart, it's really imbued in your spirit and helps you to appreciate at a very deep level the cadence, the rhythm, and the beauty of language. So Mr. McGee had a special little association with my sister Anne, my younger sister Anne. They shared the same birthday, August the 6th. And every year he would call her up and wish her happy birthday. So I think in one of those exchanges, I happened to learn that Howard was interested in experimenting with different canvases for his work, and he thought that he would like to use bottles. So I happened to be associated with a restaurant in Toronto where I worked from time to time, the Magic Pan Creperie in the Eaton Centre. So I had an unlimited supply of bottles that I could arrange through an association with the bartender there, who would save the bottles, and then I'd collect them and bring them up to Mr. McGee. And as a result, I was fortunate to inherit some of his work. These are very dear artifacts to me. And I'm sure they will remain with me always, despite my downsizing attempts. But at the time of 1980 and earlier, when I was memorizing those lines of poetry, I don't think I really knew who the poet was. So fast forward to the year 2003, when the car that I described in an earlier video, my city car, country car, was sitting in the dealership in Flesherton with my hope that someone might find it and overlook the fact that it had 400,000 kilometers and still be able to see its merit. So fortunately, along came another noted educator from Flesherton, Ray Drimmy. Some of you will remember that Ray was a guidance counselor and a teacher, and he remained a teacher all his life. He was so dedicated to helping secondary students get their secondary school diploma. And what I discovered through the exchange with the car is that Ray was also a very big fan of poetry, and he could also whistle a tune. He could whistle so beautifully he reminded me of Roger Whittaker. So for a few years, Ray and Fran, his wife, and I shared a friendship, and I was very pleased before they left the Flesherton area that I received the gift of a book of poetry. It was a huge anthology with many poems on different subjects, but there was a bookmark to the page that designated a favorite poem of Ray Drimmy, and it was, of course, Along the Line of Smoky Hills, the Crimson Forest Stands. But again, I didn't really pay attention to the author's name. Until just recently, a few years ago, I became aware of a festival that's held annually in Wyerton, Ontario, to honor someone they claim as their own, William Wilfred Campbell. Campbell moved to Wyerton when he was 11. It had a population of 200 at the time, and his father had been directed there through his work in the ministry. Campbell went on to become a very accomplished and noted Canadian poet. He was kind of unofficially regarded as the Poet Laureate of Canada and the Poet Laureate of the Lakes. He was a playwright and was quite a colorful character. So I'm pleased to see that now there is a festival in his honor, and as part of that festival they hold a poetry contest. I'm very happy to share with you that some of my Facebook friends and local poets that I have come to know and respect in the last few years have done very well in that contest. Lynn Wyville won that contest twice, and recently Lucy Leone and Jennifer Frankham have also been winners. So I'm very grateful to be in a milieu at the moment that is vibrant with many poets, and it's just a very stimulating area of our province, and many very accomplished poets are gathered here and meet together sometimes many under the mentorship of Daniel Kolash, and it's a very exciting time for poetry. I was so pleased to see that America's Got Talent had its first spoken word artist who actually won that coveted golden buzzer. The golden buzzer, Brandon Leake. So it'll be interesting to see how far he gets in the contest. But it's just another indication that the art form of poetry is alive and well, and in some ways making a comeback. And I'm pleased personally to see that some of the early Canadian poets who write in a style that has lost favor a bit with contemporary poets, but they are still being recognized for their contribution to the art form. I know that critics have been quite harsh sometimes with Campbell, and also with another poet who is one of my favorite early Canadians, and that is Emily Pauline Johnson, known usually as Pauline Johnson. Some of you may know that Pauline Johnson was of mixed heritage. Her father was a Mohawk chief in Brantford at the Six Nations Reserve, and her mother had been an English immigrant. So Pauline Johnson became very, very well known. She crisscrossed Canada apparently 19 times in the late 1800s through the newly developed Canadian Pacific Railway. And she would tour sometimes as part of a larger group of artists, and it boggles my mind to think how they made all these arrangements without cell phones or a lot of modern conveniences. But they were spoken word artists, and probably Pauline Johnson was amongst the earliest of that type of poetry presentation. And I am very grateful to my early teacher at SS number 10 Artemisia, Mrs. Marion Duncan, for ensuring that her students learned poetry, recognized its worth, and I was honored to share poetry at her 90th birthday party a few years ago. So it was Mrs. Duncan who probably first recognized that I had some talent in this language arts area, and has been an encourager, a supporter for my whole life. And Pauline Johnson was probably the first poet that I remember sparking some interest in me for this wonderful way to use language. When she died, she lived in Vancouver, and she is the only person, apparently, who was given the honor to be buried in Stanley Park. So a few years ago, I had the pleasure of speaking at a wedding in Vancouver, and I was very anxious to go to Stanley Park and to see her memorial. So thankfully, a lovely woman who lives in Vancouver, a family friend, Judy Newman, arranged for that to happen. And it was so cold that day that my teeth were chattering, but I wanted to recite my favorite poem of Pauline Johnson's by her memorial. And it never did get uplifted to YouTube or anything like that because the quality, simply because it was so cold, I didn't really think that I wanted that particular presentation. So I'm going to try again today. I'm going to try to share that poem with you. It was the last poem published by Pauline Johnson, and written by Pauline Johnson, that was published, I think, even after her death. But it's called The Ballad of Yada, and it concerns two warring tribes, and it's a tragic love story. It centers in Lulu Island, which is part of modern-day Richmond, British Columbia. And I'm happy to share this lyrical poetry because it's a style that I still very much am comfortable with on my own. And I know that it's fallen out of favor with a lot of contemporary poets who write more in a prose style. But I'm grateful to see that critics are reviewing such work with a little bit more enthusiasm now, more respect for its value, and perhaps recognizing that there is indeed something to be said about rhyming poetry that stands the test of time. And I think that no matter what style a poet chooses to express ideas, some of the poetic elements will always be the same. The use of similes, which is a comparison with the words like or as, metaphors, saying that one thing is something else, analogies, personification. The tools of the trade find their way into the creative use of language. So as I share this with you today, I hope that you can appreciate the elegance and the eloquence with which Pauline Johnson uses these poetic elements to express her story, to tell her story about the Ballad of Yada. There are fires on Lulu Island, and the sky is opalescent, with the pearl and purple tinting from the smoldering of peat. And the dream hills lift their summits in a sweeping hazy crescent, with the Capilano Canyon at their feet. There are fires on Lulu Island, and the smoke uplifting lingers in a faded scarf of fragrance as it creeps across the day. And the inlet and the narrows blur beneath its silent fingers, and the canyon is enfolded in its gray. But the sun its face is veiling, like a cloistered nun at vespers, as towards the altar candle of the night a censer swings, and the echo of tradition wakes from slumbering and whispers where the Capilano River sobs and sings. It was Yada, lovely Yada, who first taught the stream its sighing, for 'twas silent till her coming, and was voiceless as the shore. But throughout the great forever it will sing the song undying, that the lips of lovers sing forevermore. He was chief of all the Squamish, and he ruled the coastal waters, and he warred upon her people in the distant Charlotte Isles. She, a winsome basket weaver, daintiest of Haida daughters, made him captive to her singing and her smiles, till his hands forgot to havoc, and his weapons lost their lusting, till his stormy eyes allured her from the land of totem poles, till she followed where he called her, followed with a woman's trusting, to the canyon where the Capilano rolls. And the women of the Haida plied in vain their magic powers, wailed for many moons her absence, wailed for many moons their prayer. Bring her back, O Squamish foemen, bring to us our Yada flower, but the silence only answered their despair. But the men were swift to battle, swift to cross the coastal waters, swift of war and swift of weapon, swift to paddle trackless miles, crept with stealth along the canyon, stole her from her love, and brought her once again onto the distant Charlotte Isles. But she faded, ever faded, and her eyes were ever turning southward toward the Capilano, while her voice had hushed her song. And her riven heart repeated words that on her lips were burning. Not to friend, but unto foeman I belong. Give me back my Squamish lover. Though you hate, I still must love him. Give me back the rugged canyon where my heart must ever be, where his lodge awaits my coming, and the dream hills lift above him, and the Capilano learned its song from me. But through long forgotten seasons, moons too many to be numbered, he yet waited by the canyon she called across the years. And the soul within the river, though centuries had slumbered, woke to sob a song of womanly tears. For her little lonely spirit sought the Capilano Canyon when she died among the Haidas in the land of totem poles. But you yet may hear her singing to her lover-like companion if you listen to the river as it rolls. But 'tis only when the pearl and purple smoke is idly swinging from the fires on Lulu Island to the hazy mountain crest that the undertone of sobbing echoes through the river's singing in the Capilano Canyon of the West. By Pauline Johnson. So I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that you'll return for a few more poems and stories before this series ends. And I wish you well. I have fond memories of all these people that I've mentioned to you. I know that the McGees would be very proud of their children and grandchildren for the community spirit that they inherited as a legacy and that they so generously contribute. And I just hope that wherever you are, that your weather is at least manageable. It's very, very warm where I am at the moment. But in the wintertime, we will appreciate this perhaps. So have a great week, everyone, and keep well, stay safe. Understand that we're going to all wear masks, and that's a good thing. So I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye.